Now, Derek Laud is an old pal of mine from Westminster. Used to see him in the corridors of the House of Commons. He didn't make it as an elected member, but he was always well-liked around there. He is the master of foxhounds for the New Forest Hunt, which takes a bit of saying at this time of night. And we're going to talk to him about a new survey which tries to make the case that the people of rural England are healthier, safer, better educated than their city cousins. Of course, the survey points out that there are downsides to living in the country, I'll say, with seclusion and space coming inevitably higher transport costs, poor mobile phone coverage, slower internet speeds, and all of that, all these noises of animals in the night and so on. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, Derek's here to try and persuade us that the rural is better than urban. Good evening, Derek. Thanks for joining us, friend.
Not a bit.
Now, I know that you're going to try and make the case for the countryside, but I know you well enough to know that you're a follower of Dr. Johnson, and that the man who's tired of London is tired of life.
Life, yes. Well, not exactly, because I think that we should have toleration between urban areas and rural areas. And what we should really try and do is seek to educate people about the different lifestyles, the different kind of way of living, that the urban areas are as important as rural areas, that there isn't much in differentiation. We do things differently. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a country life and a urban one, and I don't think one is better than the other. So I'm approaching this, I think, in a rather balanced way. But
that's not like you, Derek.
Well, I'm trying to be reasonable because I expect you to be unreasonable.
And I'm just about to live up to your expectations, or down to them. The rural population is predominantly aged, between the ages of 45 and 64 for men, 45 and 59 for females. So it's generally older than the urban population. And the population of rural England is now down to just 19% of the total. So 80% of us or more are actually living in the cities. But the data tells us that the people of rural England are healthier, safer, and better educated than their city cousins, but they're less likely to be homeless, less likely to be living in poverty, unemployed, or a victim of crime, and they'll probably live longer too, which I thought was a little surprising. A man in the town can expect to die a full 2 years earlier than his equivalent in the countryside, and it's the same for women. And you're almost twice as likely, this is predictable, to be the victim of violent crime in towns and cities. So, I mean, it's swings and roundabouts, but it seems like the younger people are voting with their feet and heading for the towns and cities, and that's been the pattern for a couple of 100 years in this country.
Exactly, that's absolutely right. So, I mean, in that sense, I mean, there's absolutely no change. And of course, you know, when you're young, you migrate to where the jobs are, where the opportunities are, where there are good schools and very good transport infrastructure, and so on. As you get older and you're standing more on your own 2 feet, and you look at life in a more kind of calm and rational way, you begin to understand the kind of quality of life that you get in rural England as opposed to urban conurbations. And on balance, it's actually rather cheaper to live in the countryside than it is in urban areas. But one thing I would say is that don't forget that many rural people commute to urban areas for employment. So they're not strangers to urban landscapes. They are visitors. It's just that they choose to retreat back to a different way of life in the evenings or at weekends.
What about the race issue? You must be one of the relatively few, black men living in the countryside.
Yes. Well, I mean, I can go for days and days and days without seeing anybody where I live in the countryside. and I've gone for decades and decades and decades without bumping into another black person in the countryside. But I mean, I don't see colour as an issue. And
No, you don't, but do they?
Well, I think probably not, because the introduction that you gave to me was that I was, in fact, a former Master of Hounds, and I mean, if there were any greater illustration of meritocracy, my appointment must be that.
No, I mean, you're no doubt a handy killer of sentient beings.
No, I have huntsmen that do that, but I like to ride to hounds. And this isn't a discussion about fox hunting, but what I'm saying, which I think is a very important fact, when I was unanimously appointed as Master of Hounds in this country, nobody saw colour. They weren't interested in that. They were interested in the fact that I was a good horseman, and that's exactly the right judgment they should have made.
You'll remember John Taylor, sadly,
Yes.
Lord Taylor now incarcerated, God knows where, Wormwood Scrubs.
Yes.
He stood as the Tory candidate for the then rock-solid Tory seat of Cheltenham,
Yes.
which is not the countryside, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
And so awful was the treatment of him
Yes.
by even Tory members, never mind voters, that the government in the end had to put him in the House of Lords because they needed to save some face. What did you think of what's happened to Lord Taylor?
Well, I'm very sad for John Taylor. I've known him for a long time. I haven't seen him in probably a decade or so. But when I did know him, I mean, he was a very Christian man with very strong beliefs. He had then a wife who was a doctor, and they had 2 children. And in that sense, he was a fairly sort of typical stereotype of modern Britain. I don't know exactly the details about the expenses, irregularities, except to say that in fairness to him and to everybody else, I think it was a culture that was encouraged, and it was silently agreed, that it was kind of like a top-up system for members of Parliament being relatively badly paid. But the law's the law, and it's being enforced by the courts. I think, however, that Parliament should probably have made the position much clearer in advance of legal action and people being prosecuted and sent to jail, because the fault is really that of Parliament rather than individual members of Parliament or members of the House of Lords.
Well, sum up finally, if you would, Derek. Would it be right to say that whilst you enjoy the countryside, you obviously enjoy being one of the unspeakable, riding round after the uneatable in your red coat with your brass horn, shouting tally-ho and all that. You obviously enjoy that, but you like the lights of London too.
Oh, I do, because I've got dancing shoes, and it doesn't take long to convince me to go into Soho and dance the night away.
Derek Laud, thank you very much indeed. Master of Foxhounds of the New Forest Hunt. Try saying that when it's this time of night. 08717 223344.